a geek. Talking baseball every week. Because they're Gleeman and a geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, the Wrist is Okay episode. I am John Bones, Twins Daily, with me, Aaron Gleeman, the Athletic.
Well, hi, John. My wrist is... Oh, not me. Yeah,
I was worried about
it's my best body part at this point, the wrist.
Well, yeah.
You going to list off better body parts? You want me to stand up and turn around?
I can list off worst ones.
Well, yeah. Just start listing them. I told you a minute ago, John handed me a piece of paper where the words were blurry.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I can still read it. I said, at this point, my eyes are probably my least weak body part, and I've been wearing glasses since I was 12.
I was going to say.
So
you got 2300 vision.
Yeah, I don't even know. It's not that bad. It was horrible at 12, and it's gotten not worse, really,
wow.
which is really strange.
Yeah.
You're, of course, talking about...
I have a detached retina, or I had a detached... I almost had a detached retina.
Your eyeballs are trying to leave your skull, basically. That's how they don't like being there. Because they look at me 3 times a week, possibly. But we'll see. You're talking about, of course, Carlos Correa. We're recording this Friday morning, so we can only really go off what his status was last night.
That's right.
Carlos Correa gets hit. Twins are already up. What were they up? They were up 1 million runs at that point. Right. It was like in the
9-3
7th inning or something.
Yeah.
He gets hit by a 94-mile-an-hour pitch from a Diamondbacks reliever, and it hit him on the right wrist, I would say, or forearm.
Underneath the wrist, kind of, right? Yeah.
And his immediate reaction looked pretty bad. He basically, he drops the bat. He holds up his arm,
right,
kind of like to clear it from his body, like to get it. I don't know, like, and just immediately
and didn't do anything like make a fist or anything like that.
No, he just held his arm up.
It was just kind of there,
like a limp arm up in the air, and like he was riding the subway. He was holding on to the
yeah.
And then he just kept shaking his head, and he immediately the trainer didn't even come out to him.
Right,
he just made a beeline for the dugout.
Yeah, that's right.
Kept shaking his head. You could see him in the dugout basically saying like, oh God, like what? Yeah, and then he got mad and he tossed something and then went into the clubhouse with the training staff, obviously.
All of that happened in about 10 seconds. Right. As long as you took to describe it, is how long it took him to get into the clubhouse.
Yes. Right. So it was a hell of a buzzkill for a game that they ended up winning by 1 million.
Right.
I'm thinking... broke his forearm or something. Right. Like that.
Just the way everybody thought he must have broken his forearm.
I even started looking up, timelines for that, and then
Brooks Lee's batting average.
So the Saints, Sean Aronson, who's Saints communications and also their announcer, does a great job over there. I believe just signed up for the Patreon.
This
week.
Be great. Well, good for him.
We'll see if he's dropped it already. I think sometimes people go, yeah, you were mentioned on the show. They sign up. I don't know if we mentioned him or not, but I'm mentioning him now. Sean Aronson does a great job as an announcer, but also as their communications person. But they tweeted out like between the time Correa left the game and the time there was a post game update on his status from the Twins, the Saints tweeted out just like a camera phone video of Brooks Lee taking infield before the game, as if to say, well, he's still here, he's alive, and he's taking infield. Because like you said, my immediate was, there's about an hour before the Saints game starts, or an hour and a half maybe. Let's see if Brooks Lee, who was playing shortstop and batting, I think, second or third, is still in the lineup. Mm-hmm. He was still in the lineup. And the update that the Twins gave on Correa post-game, hopefully by the time people are reading this, it's a non-issue because he's been playing. But the update was basically contusion. Now, I will caution with that phrasing of a contusion, which basically means bruise.
Right.
They will give that for everything.
Sure.
Because almost every injury is at minimum a contusion.
Right.
So there's been situations where a guy has broken a wrist or shattered an elbow or, a kneecap or whatever, or, whatever it is. And it will always be so-and-so has a contusion because...
And soft tissue stuff.
Well, right.
Like the fact that the x-ray is fine is good, but there can be other stuff that can happen.
Right. Although with this one,
or something like
obviously the breaking of something was it. So yeah, they announced he has a contusion. Initial x-rays, which they do at the ballpark, I'm assuming. That's what they do at Target Field. we're clean, no breaks, and then I'm sure he's going to go more imaging today, maybe an MRI or something like that. Depends how he comes in this morning. But the fact that he stuck around to give quotes, because oftentimes when guys are really hurt, they're not going to talk to the media afterward. Sometimes they're at the hospital or en route to some specialist or whatever. And he basically said, I'm going to be in the lineup tomorrow. Now, well, by the time people listen to this, they might know. But I would be surprised if he's in the lineup tonight, which is his tomorrow.
Yeah.
But that's more of a twin. I mean, certainly if he's able to even play 3 days from now, that's an accomplishment given what it looked like in the moment.
Sure.
I think he basically said his reaction was because his arm went numb at the time.
Right.
So he probably thinks, I don't know, I shattered my whole arm or it hit, ripped some nerve or who the hell knows. Which we'll see. Hopefully it didn't do that. But then he basically made it sound like by the time he got to the x-ray, however many minutes later,
he could feel his arm again.
He felt normal-ish. Now, I'm going to guess, similar to Max Kepler when he got hit on the elbow week and a half ago, whatever it was. You think because you avoided something serious, and hopefully he did avoid something serious, hopefully whatever testing he has today confirms that. We'll see. But you still got hit by a 94-mile-an-hour pitch on a part of the body that you're not used to getting hit on with that. So you're gonna have a contusion, which is a bruise. You're gonna be inflammation, whatever.
Well, and
we'll see.
Wrist injuries are one of those things that for baseball players in particular can be really tricky. So
it's unfortunate. I mean, obviously, hopefully he's fine, and if he ends up missing a few games, whatever it is, that's a great outcome given the circumstances. It's a shame though, because one, they're playing well.
Right.
I mean, he came out of a game that they had 1 million runs. Right. And he's just been incredible now for a month, essentially. He's hitting like 500 in June.
Yeah.
And he even started a little bit before June. He had a couple of 2-3 hit games. Before that, he's raised his batting average to like 310. He's got, I think, the second best OPS plus of his career right now. He's been very healthy since missing the couple weeks earlier in the season. So, be a tough break to lose Correa at any point, but he's playing his best baseball, certainly in a Twins uniform, and it's got to be up there.
You're right.
Non-October version, best baseball he's ever played, just period. And that's saying something with Correa, obviously.
It feels like every time he's up there, he's going to get a hit at this point.
Just it hasn't been. There's been some power in there. He's had a couple of big home runs during that. But it's really just been the quality of the at-bats, or I guess plate appearances when he draws walks. But he just, even if it's 0-2, 1-2, he never seems really in danger. And he strikes out once in a while, but he doesn't strike out much. He draws a lot of walks, and just everything is just a solidly hit, single. He pulls some.
He's intimidating up there right now.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I still would like to see him batting second. I don't know why you'd want that guy batting fifth, unless you're looking at the 2017 Astros lineup or something like that. Although this lineup has been since the 7 and here's a stat for you. Since starting 7 and 13, the Twins have scored the most runs in baseball.
Right.
In baseball. More than the Yankees, more than the Dodgers, more than the Phillies.
He's batting number 2 when they're facing lefties.
True.
Yesterday.
Yes. And they've been destroying lefties. I looked this up, too. So they have won 5 straight games started by a left-handed pitcher, a left-handed pitching opponent, and 8 of 10 versus lefties. And overall this season, against left-handed starting pitchers, they lead the majors in batting average and OPS against left-handed pitchers. Left-handed starting pitchers, I should say, which that gets back to a topic from early in the season in terms of game planning and adjustments. It's important to hit relievers, too, if you're going to have comeback wins, especially, which they've had quite a few of. They've done fine against relievers, too. But I like to look at the starting pitcher numbers, especially versus lefties, because those are the guys you can game plan against because you're going to face them, twice or 3 times in the game. And that's the lineup you're building for most of the time. Right. You're building not so much. You may have a consideration or two. Maybe I'll put this guy 6th instead of 7th because then when they bring in a reliever, but for the most part, like we've seen quite a bit now. I think 3 or 4 of their last week or so have been against lefties. Yeah, right. They build a lineup that's just 9 right-handed hitters. You got Correa up at the top. Yep. You got Willie Castro near the bottom. Willie Castro was
batting 8th yesterday. Yeah, right.
And he's
been on fire too.
Destroy lefties, and it's great to see. And as we talked about on the Patreon a couple of days ago, we've been waiting for this for 3 years. I mean, this is what they did even more so in 2019. I mean, their numbers against lefties in 2019, the Bomba squad, where it was, Nelson Cruz. I mean, they just had Garver, Sano, Cruz, Buxton. I mean, they just had righties galore. And
then the next year they added Josh Donaldson. We thought, this team is going to absolutely kill them.
They were mediocre. Right. And then in 2021 and 22, they were also pretty mediocre, despite the fact that they still had a predominantly, I mean, they added Correa then at that point, right-handed lineup. Last year, I don't think they were great for most of the time against lefties. And then this year, they started very slowly against lefties, too. And we were like, why does this group, when they can trot out at minimum 8, sometimes it was 8 and Kepler 8 righties and Kepler, and now lately it's just been 9 righties.
Right, yes.
And they could do 10 right now. They have 10 righties they could do. And
poor Austin Martin, he's like, when do I get to play?
And finally now they're destroying lefties. It's not like they've been bad against righties, but it's an interesting thing because it's a great skill to have as a team, and it's something you can more like plan for in roster building and lineup building. And when you have guys like Margot or Farmer, who that's really their specific role as right-handed hitters who go against left-handed pitchers, you can sort of construct a lineup that on paper will be good or should be good, I'll say, against lefties. And so to see that happen, I mean, they've clearly constructed their bench that way. Right. And they've signed, a lot of right-handed hitters.
And they've also had, they've signed a lot of right-handed hitters, and then a lot of the left-handed hitters have been struggling, and so they've been sent down to AAA, so you have even more right-handed hitters out there, right?
Basically replaced, the Julian Wallner Kirilloff set with like Miranda and Martin, who are righties. And ideally, you'd have a little bit more left-handed thump, which they're obviously going to be hoping to get to in the second half, have one or two of those guys I just mentioned, or perhaps Brooks Lee, who we can talk about here in a moment, who's a switch hitter, come up, and then I think that would really take the lineup to another level because it's great to crush lefties, but you're a little bit like the value of that or the impact of that as a team-wide skill is a little bit out of your hands sometimes. Like we've seen of late over the past 2 weeks, they've faced a bunch of lefties and they've crushed them, and it's really helped them. But you can often, I mean, for the most part, you face left-handed starting pitchers maybe a quarter to a third of the time.
I was going to say.
In the average season, you might face 40-something, 50 maybe left-handed. Right. It depends on your division. It depends on just that part of the schedule. I mean, they could easily go 2 weeks without facing a left-handed starter, in which case this great asset as a team or this great team-wide skill doesn't get used. And then, of course, you can go towards the playoffs and look ahead. And it's like, well, if you're facing the Mariners, that does you no good.
Right.
They don't have any lefties that are going to really do anything at any point. And there's other rotations like that, too. So, on the other hand, if you get matched up against a team that does have lefties, the Yankees or something like that, although I don't think they want to get matched up with the Yankees. But like Cleveland has no lefties. I mean, they have one, Logan Allen. Right. But there are certain teams where it's like, man, if we get matched up against them, we're either going to crush them or they're going to have to not start some of these guys.
Starter, right.
There are other teams who it's like, well, we're not going to see a lefty this
whole
series.
It's not like this team has struggled against right-handed.
No, they've been fine. They've been above average against righties.
Right.
I just think you look at like personnel-wise, they're like missing one more lefty bat, and like you said, it's an obvious explanation for that. Is 3 guys they were counting on are in the minors or injured in Kirilloff's case. So they have now finished the first half of the season. I know it's not the All-Star break, but 45-36, which is you can do the math on that. That's a 90-win pace. Since the 7-13 start, they're at a 101 win pace. And like I said, they've scored the most runs in Major League Baseball over that period, which is, 60-something games, 61 games, I want to say.
Sure.
Now up next, you finish this road trip in Seattle, which could be a potential playoff matchup.
Right. Including the in Seattle part.
Right. Yes. And the 3-game series part too.
Right.
But now the wild card stand. First of all, they're 7 games back at Cleveland.
7 games back at Cleveland.
On some level, we talked about this a couple days ago too. Like it's incumbent upon the Twins to just play well, eyes on the prize, focus on yourself, just keep chugging along here, which they've done. At some point, you are going to need Cleveland to have a poor stretch.
Stumble.
There's like no amount of playing well. I mean, we've seen this. The Twins have played at a 101 win pace, and they haven't really made up any ground on them, essentially. So
And they've got 8 games left versus Cleveland,
Right.
but
Now,
they have yet to win versus Cleveland.
Correct.
So, right.
And even if you go, I don't know, 5-3, you've only
6 and 2.
two games
Yeah,
or whatever.
right.
So, but if you focus on the wild card race, they're in a really good spot there. Basically, the first wild card is going to go, it looks like, to the AL East runner-up, which leaves 2 wild cards. And basically, right now, there's 3 teams above 500 that are fighting for it. Now, the Astros are about to go back above 500 after being way
They
down.
are 500 right now, yeah.
Rays probably similar situation. There are some other teams, even the Rangers or the Blue Jays or something like that could to make a run here. But at the moment, it's basically Twins, Royals, Red Sox, and they've been kind of bouncing back and forth between the second and the third wild card spot. So that's interesting to watch. My one thought is, if the Red Sox really got hot, could the Red Sox overtake somebody for second in the AL East? I mean, the Red Sox are only like 6 games behind them. And then that would be interesting because then that would drop the Yankees into the second or third wild card spot.
Right.
And clear them, sort of, from the Twins' immediate attention.
The Twins are 7 games back at Cleveland, but they're 6 games behind the lead wild card team, which is the Yankees.
True. Okay, so just go beat them. Then the problem there is you might end up playing, we'll see. Anyway, it's very early for that, but we're at the exact halfway point, so I figured it was worth just checking on the numbers. Before we talk about some news and notes and thoughts from the just completed series win over the Diamondbacks, who looked pretty bad, I thought, the Diamondbacks.
Yeah.
Defensively, they made a lot of mistakes.
Yesterday, they made a ton
I'm
of
mostly
mistakes.
thinking about
Yes,
yesterday.
right.
They just, a lot of plays, whether they were errors or weren't called
They certainly have some strengths. I think their bullpen is a strength.
Yeah. Well, we saw that in the one game they won. If they can get the lead,
that's right.
But their pitching looked bad. I mean, Montgomery's looked terrible all year.
Right.
And their defense just was super sloppy. Now, I give, Buxton, basically, his legs created 2 plays where they couldn't get outs on.
You are correct.
Which those add up. But, their defense seemed, even in left field, Gurriel made a couple of bad plays. I don't know. It's always nice when the Twins take advantage of that.
Yes.
Because you tend to forget about that.
Well,
you tend to remember when the Twins are the ugly side of it.
Especially, a couple of weeks ago when Royce Lewis was throwing the ball past first base. And
he made another bad throw yesterday.
I missed that one.
On a ball he came in on and just airmailed it. Real kind of lackadaisical. Threw it 10 feet above Santana's head. Yeah, he gets to a lot at third, and I think overall he's been fine, if you're including last year. But his throws are very strange. They seemed like almost he's trying to control them, aim them a little bit.
Yeah.
But his throwing motion is very pointed down, and so a lot of the balls seem to go low. Yeah. And then I wonder if he's trying to kind of counteract that on this one throw. This one he was charging in and he just threw it high. But yeah, it's could be he's fine at third, but he needs to avoid having this sort of snowball.
Right, yeah.
Because I don't know what their alignment would be if he can't be trusted at third. And also, he's good enough. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you could DH Lewis, I guess. But he's good enough. I mean, he's capable of being a good third baseman.
Right.
We have a Castro then who plays second. That's my point.
Right.
Before we talk about some more stuff from the series, let's talk about
why I feel so good this morning.
Because I'm here?
No.
No.
No, that's why I drank last night. But before I went and drank last night, I took a Z-Biotic, which is it's about the size of like one of those little 5-hour energy drinks. It's just a tiny little thing, right? And what is a Z-Biotic? Well, it's a pre-alcohol probiotic drink. So it's just a probiotic, right? And it was invented to tackle basically rough mornings after drinking. You take that before you go out. We had a big building happy hour yesterday. It was Margaritaville down in the fireside room.
Every day's Margaritaville for you, John. Yeah, okay.
And the way it works is that when you drink alcohol, it gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut, and it's this byproduct that is to blame for the rough next day, and Z-Biotic just produces an enzyme to break down that byproduct down, and you just have to remember to take it as your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly.
Here's what you do. You go to Z, like the letter Z, zbiotics.com/Gleeman, and you get 15% off your first order when you use the code Gleeman at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked, so go to zbiotics.com/Gleeman. Use the code Gleeman at checkout. You get 15% off, and thank you to ZBiotics for sponsoring this episode and John's evening, apparently.
That's right. Also, let's talk a little bit about Game Time. Game Time is our go-to app for getting tickets to Twins games or to basically anything. And notice I said app. It is not a website. It is an app. You need to download the Game Time app. And once you do that, you're going to be able to get last-minute tickets, bargains on tickets. I guarantee you'll be able to find tickets cheaper to Twins games on Game Time than you'll be able to find even from the Twins themselves.
And the beauty of having it on your phone, John has done this many, many times.
Yeah.
You get up from wherever you're pre-gaming Twins games in North Loop or whatever downtown.
Usually Brixworth or something
sure,
like that.
Yeah, fine.
Brixworth, Clicks, whatever.
You probably see John next to you as you do this. Just odds are.
Yeah.
And call up the app on your phone, sort by whatever, put in the price. And the other thing is they do a good job kind of recommending the tickets that represent the best value for the price that you're looking for.
Right.
What the normal cost is, what the location of the tickets. So you're not just kind of choosing blindly. And from the time you get up from your pregame spot, or even if you park, let's say you go park downtown, by the time you're walking out of your car to the ballpark,
yes,
a couple of clicks, you can have the ticket on your phone, flash it, and walk right in through whatever gate you're at. And that's the beauty of it.
You can take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and when you create that account, use code Gleeman for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, you just create an account and redeem codes GLEEMAN for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
Okay, so let's talk Buxton for a minute because that's fun. There's a few fun things in the series. Buxton, another big game yesterday. Wow. We saw the assortment of skills that make Buxton so thrilling when he's even remotely healthy.
Yep.
Which is he does things with his legs.
Right.
Like I said, two different plays where a mere mortal probably there's at least one out involved on the play. Both times he avoids the out. Then you say, man, this guy's still fast as hell. He's still so fast.
That's right.
I think the one play that he beat out at first, he had the fastest sprint speed of any Twin this year. And I think it was the fastest of any Diamondbacks opponent this year also.
As Corey Provo says, he can still really turn it on when he needs to. He almost seems to save it up now.
Which is smart.
For like that. Say. Yeah, right.
And then just when you think, man, the wheels are really something with this guy. Like this is 100th percentile wheels that we've been watching now for 10 years. Then he hits 460 to dead center. And you go, that's right. He does that too.
He does that too.
Which was the Twins' furthest home run of the season. And I think like the fourth furthest of Buxton's career. He didn't really make any like spectacular catches. That's the true like Buxton triple header.
Sure.
Or a hat trick, I guess. Yeah. But it's when he's healthy, even at 30 and even all the things he's been through, fortunately now over the last 2.5, 3 weeks, we've seen something approximating the exciting, game-changing MVP talent that we've seen at times on and off over the years in the brief windows when he's been healthy and everything's been clicking. And over his last 17 games, so it's like 3 weeks basically.
I you started going from June 7th, I think, because I just pulled it up right now. Yeah.
He's hitting 360 with 4 homers. Raised his OPS from like the low 600s to 760. And here's the thing about a 760 OPS. The league OPS is like 700.
Right.
Compared to center fielders, which, by the way, he's been in center field a lot this year, and he's been quite good in center field. He's out-hitting the average Major League center fielder by 85 points of OPS. Right. He's also outfielding the average center fielder. I don't have an exact number on that, but he's above average there. We got a question 2 days ago when we did a midweek mailbag for the Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. We'd love to have you join us. You get a special email. You send in your questions. We answer them midweek. And it was like, well, if this is the version of Buxton, is that worth the $15 million a year? And my point was people really overreact to what $15 million per year in the baseball realm,
right,
not the real world, that's a lot of money,
right,
gets you. And to that point, after this little run that Buxton has been on now, he's got like a 110 OPS plus, which means he's been 10% better. It might even be a little higher now than the league average.
Right.
He's been 15,
while playing center field.
Right. He's been 15 to 20% better than the average center fielder offensively. Right. You add in the defensive value, the base running value, and aside from the short stint he was on the IL, which is close to the minimum stint, he's played a lot. Like, he's certainly played as much as anybody could have hoped,
right,
I would say, at this point. And he's right on the cusp of producing 2 wins above replacement in half a season. And that's key because, generally speaking, wins above replacement have a valuation in terms of, like, what would this cost on the free agent market of, like, $8 to $9 million a year. Right. Well, if you're a 2-WAR player,
that's $16 to $18 million a year.
And he's making 15. And we're at the halfway point. Now, you got to stay healthy.
Yep.
And you can subtract WAR if he goes and hits 110 or something like that. But it's been great to see. And the amazing thing is, because of all the injuries and the ups and downs that he's gone through, they were forced to build a lineup not so much around him anymore, but like build a lineup and then have him in it.
Right, yeah.
And early in the season, he was batting much higher, and he was struggling. Of late, he's batted 6th, 7th, 8th sometimes, I think, in that range. And, you know, if he continues to look this good...
He feels like a luxury at this point.
Right, that's kind of what I'm saying.
You know, you're right. I mean,
they have an existing really good lineup, and then he's like a bonus.
He feels like a luxury in part because, you know, he doesn't even have to be in the middle of the lineup anymore.
Right.
And partly because, well, we didn't really know we were going to have him at all this year.
Correct.
You know, right? Like,
that's what I mean. They were kind of forced to basically say... Well, what if Buxton gives us nothing?
Right.
What would this lineup look like? And, you know, there was optimism even during the offseason, but heading into spring training, they felt like this knee surgery was different than past knee surgeries because it really addressed a specific thing that they had kind of not found previously and all that. And
allowed them to kind of mess around trying to figure out how they were going to get the center fielder until midway through spring training. Right.
And so he's looked great. And, you know, the beauty of having as many good hitters as they have right now, and even having more at AAA. We're going to talk about Brooks Lee in a second, but even those 3 lefties we talked about, and there's other guys there too, is that even if he weren't, you know, let's say he now goes into a slump, which he's been prone to his whole career.
I mean, he was in a slump, I would say, before this has happened.
Yes.
Just before this happened, we were like, you know, he's been off the IL now for like a month.
Yes.
And I'm starting to worry about him. Right. And then he just started catching up to fastballs again.
But if he's hitting, he's now at 110, 115 OPS plus with his defense and as a positional value. I mean, that's a borderline all-star performance. But even if he's just at 100 OPS plus, which he was, 2 weeks ago basically, and was last year, a good defensive center fielder with good speed, who's a league average hitter, is still a well above average player overall. Yes. And so to see that he's still, I don't want to say I'd resigned myself to that, but, as of a month ago, it was like, all right, well, their lineup is good enough, and if he's batting 7th or 8th, he can, add value defensively, pop the occasional homer, do some running. It's still, is he the star of the team? No. Is he the guy that everything revolves around? No. And in some ways, it's to see him not be relegated to that role, but be not needed in the more prominent role. Yeah, it's given him time to kind of, I think, figure out this knee and get healthier, which he talked about yesterday. And now I have no problem with him batting 7th. I mean, realistically, should he be batting 5th or 6th? Yeah, but
during this tear, I would like to see it probably batting a little higher.
But also, who are you moving? I mean, they got plenty. We're talking about Correa's batting 5th sometimes. I mean, they have plenty of guys, particularly right-handed. Now, they would love someone like Buxton producing
left-handed.
Like this left-handed.
That's right, yeah.
Because Kepler has really been struggling.
Right.
Larnick has been up and down and overall mediocre, I would say. Castro obviously has been great, but he's been leading off a lot of the time. So, it's great to see with Buxton.
The top 5 now versus right-handers are pretty much set. We know it's interesting how much different Rocco is approaching a lineup now that he's got people that are actually hitting in the top 5, as opposed to what was going on for all of April and most of May, where Royce Lewis is missing and the rest of the lineup is struggling, and you've got people, you've got a lot of bench players that are struggling. You've got a fair number of regular players. They just weren't hitting, like we talked about, the 7 and 13. It seemed like Jeffers was being pushed up to number 2, number 3 because he was the only guy who was swinging a hot bat at that time. Yeah. And now, you never see Jeffers in that role anymore.
Yeah, I mean, so much of the, not even criticisms, but the things where people are like, oh, Rocco does this. Short hooks, how he manages the bullpen, platooning,
lots of
lineup changes, all that stuff. A lot of it gets proven to be, for instance, last year when they gave him a rotation full of guys who performed well. What do you know? The hooks weren't as short.
That's right. Yeah.
Like to your point, when he has a handful of guys who are performing really well, there isn't as much mixing and matching against righties. Yeah. And also, I'll note that not seeing as many complaints about the why do they platoon so much now that they're murdering left-handed pitchers with an all platoon-based lineup of 9 righties, which early in the season it was like...
Well, it also helps that they got all the left-handed hitters that people like off the team.
Well, that's true. Although a lot of those guys hit themselves off the team.
You're right. Yes. I'm not saying there was vengefulness there.
Yeah. So that's what we're seeing from the lineup, which is good because the starting pitching... and just the pitching in general has not been exceptional really at any point this season for any sort of length of time, more than one turn through the rotation, let's say. Which brings us to our second topic, which is the Paddack-Festa rotation situation.
Yeah, right.
We talked about this more in the moment, actually before it had been officially announced 2 days ago with Festa, because we knew it was going to be Festa. But Paddack placed on the IL with right shoulder fatigue. Everyone involved, including Paddack, basically said, I'm not injured.
Right.
It just feels like I'm throwing a bowling ball, basically. And,
which you might expect after coming back from Tommy John surgery. Before,
dead arm, pitchers will talk about this time of year, that sort of thing. And also just his performance. Like he had, 3 or 4 pretty bad starts in a row, or just not underwhelming starts in a row. His velocity,
really inconsistent. Yeah, I would say inconsistent starts in a row.
I mean, and that goes. The velocity is the same thing. He'd have starts where he's throwing 96, and then the last start he was throwing 90. And it's like, well, yeah, some of that is you're coming back from surgery. Some of it is he's just never thrown that many. I mean, he's not a guy who's thrown a lot of innings because of injuries, because of stylistically all that. And so I think them shutting him down in June, I'm not at all surprised by that. We joked coming into the season he was going to be on the Michael Pineda plan, which was like you make 10 starts, you go on the IL for 15 days. Yep. You come back, you make 10 starts, you go on the IL for 15 days. Not because you're injured, just because, take a break.
Yeah,
reset a little bit.
You're coming back from Tommy John surgery. Right.
So what's interesting, though, within that is they could have used Monday's off day to just skip his first turn in the rotation. And then they could have just called up Louis Varlin or Kalen Bosley or Randy Dobnak or whoever it is at AAA to start on this upcoming homestand. And then at that point, if you were just going to have Paddack miss the minimum, which is 15 days for a pitcher, you could have timed it such that he could have then made the third start, essentially.
Yeah, they had an off day before he went on the IL. They have an off day after he's been on the IL. You can just keep everybody back on their normal time.
You could have given him a 2-week break, essentially, and only had him miss 1 start. But the Twins chose not to do that, I think in part because they didn't want to... Well, they wanted to give the other 4 starters an extra day. And even going back a week and a half ago, they inserted Louis Varlin into the rotation unneeded, just decided to do it to make a spot start. They threw 5 shutout innings. To give everyone a break. That included Paddack, but to give everyone an extra day, sort of mid-season. Right. Let's not push it. And so they took that same approach here, which I have no problem with.
Yeah, he's not the only guy who's looked a little fatigued amongst that rotation.
For the most part, just they're at what are they at? 16 starts each or 15, 16 starts. You're halfway through here. You're coming up on 100 innings. A lot of the guys, this is just the mid-season. It's when you get fatigued. So I think they felt like it's not worth juggling to minimize Paddack's absence and to only have basically 1 start needed. Once you then make that decision, or maybe Festa factored into that decision, because my thought on Festa was, I want to see Festa. I've been on him as their top pitching prospect for a year and a half now. He's a top 100 prospect. I was impressed with him during spring training and on and on and on. The numbers are great. control is really the only issue. We'll talk about his debut in a minute, but you could have Paddack miss only one start, and then it's like, well, we'll just have Bosley fill in, or we'll have Louis Varland fill in, which he's done 2 weeks ago, spot start. And then it's almost just like, hey, you skipped a turn or two. It's not a big thing. But I wonder, my presumption just looking at the schedule is that Paddack is going to sit through the All-Star break. Because I just don't understand why you wouldn't do that, why you wouldn't get an extra basically week in there. You can have him miss one more start and essentially get 3 turns in the rotation extra out of it. And so maybe he'll be pushing to come back. But, I mean, the All-Star break is in, 3 weeks?
Something like that.
So it's not...
and it's a long All-Star break for the Twins. The Twins don't have a Friday game after that week either,
and they could keep him on the IL until like the 4th game after, or the 5th game if they wanted to, after the All-Star break, which you could give him basically a month off and have him really only miss like 3 or 4 starts.
Right.
But what was interesting is they didn't choose to skip, or they didn't choose to move everybody else up. They didn't choose to minimize the fill-in starts needed. Right. They're choosing to keep everyone on rotation and put someone into the Paddack spot. And once you make that decision, and it's going to be minimally 2 or 3 starts, and potentially, like I laid out here, 3, 4, 5 starts a month, basically. Right. Well, why not call up Festa? He's 24 years old. Right. He's been dominating at AAA.
You can see a little something about what you've got there before the trade deadline. Like that might be true too. Well. Yeah.
But I just love the idea. Not that you can't call up a top prospect for a day or a week or whatever. They've done that before. Plenty of guys make their debuts and then go right back down to the major or the minors. It doesn't. It's not.
And if he'd have fallen apart yesterday, maybe he would have too. Right.
Yes. Right. But I do like the idea when it's some guy that you think of as a long-term piece, which they do with David Festa for sure. And it's not, we're not rushing him from AA. I mean, he's gotten a good chunk of time. He ended last year at AAA. He's pitched well at AAA. He's not 21. He's, he's gotten some workload. He's an upper minors pitching prospect. And I love the idea of basically, I'm sure they didn't say this to him, but in their mind saying, he's got like 4 starts here.
Right.
And you know what? If he pitches really well for most of that time, who knows what happens at that point? Who knows what Paddack's situation is? Who knows what the other guy's situation is health-wise? Who knows what the bullpen looks like at that point? I mean, I love the idea of giving a guy that you want to be a long-term piece, giving them not just a tiny little window to get their feet wet, but giving them a chance to go swimming.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Giving them a chance. And maybe he has, his debut wasn't amazing. It looked good beginning. Overall, a mixed bag, I would say.
Yeah, he didn't have as much swing and miss stuff as I thought.
Which let's talk about that in a second. But like, even if his next couple of starts are like that, and that's the overall vibe, is like, he pitched fine, but he wasn't dominant. He didn't look great. He had a couple rough stretches that he's not always going to get a million runs of run support. So he might take a loss when he allows 5 runs sometimes. But then, okay, send him back to the minors. But at least he can go back and say, I didn't just, parachute in the morning of the game and start once and head back to St. Paul and all that. I like this especially for a guy that you think could have a real chance to do something.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to it.
And we should just, for those people who don't know David Festa, he does have a chance to really do something. Like, this is a guy who, you might take a look at his profile and say, he's drafted in the 13th round. Is this just sort of a fill-in guy, a Randy Dobnik story or something like that? No, he was drafted in the 13th round, but he has now he's risen through the ranks at this point and developed enough, velocity that, he's been, like you said, recently he is now making top 100 prospect lists, right? Which is, a significant prospect. He's got number 1, number 2 upside in the rotation.
Yes. I would say he's their best homegrown pitching prospect because they acquired Joe Ryan when he was at AAA, and Joe Ryan was a pretty good prospect. But their best homegrown pitching prospect, starting pitching prospect, since Barrios probably.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You could maybe argue for a couple other guys in that spot. But, yeah, he was a 13th round pick out of Seton Hall. And, he's if people watched yesterday, he's 6'6". He's added like 25 pounds.
The Slim Reaper.
And he's so skinny. He's a beanpole.
I do love that nickname.
It's a good nickname. Although I think that's Kevin Durant. That's what they call him.
Oh, is that what they call it?
But it's a good nickname. Right. So when they drafted him, imagine 25 pounds lighter.
Right.
You could slide him under a door if you wanted at that point. But he's 6'6", and he's a great example of the type of development the Twins are trying to do through the draft, and they've done this with Louis Varland as an example of this too.
Bailey Ober is one too.
Bailey Ober's an example. There's other guys coming up, Corey Lewis, C.J. Culpepper, Zebby Matthews.
Yeah.
Now, they need some of these guys to establish themselves in the majors before I'm ready to declare this approach successful. But for now, it looks pretty good, which is they take these often big, right-handed, typically, starting pitchers from college, but not big programs, not SEC, not Big Ten. He's from Seton Hall, or they took guys from what?
And one of the reasons they're not in those big programs is because they don't have a lot of velocity.
Right.
Like
they
that's
were
the thing
either
that's
late
missing from
bloomers.
the arsenal. Right.
They grew at the last minute.
Right.
In David Festa's case, I believe he was an infielder until his senior year of high school, and then pitched a little, and he was good. Right. And then the other thing is, I'm not trying to criticize the coaches for some of these mid-level or low-level college teams, because some of them are probably great. But you don't always get the level of instruction that's going to tap in, especially on the pitching side. For instance,
the resources and development.
Yeah, it's different if you're at Georgia or you're at LSU than if you're at Coastal Carolina or whatever it is. And so I think they believe that that's an area to tap into, and that they can draft some of these right-handed starting pitchers like David Festa, get them on a strength and conditioning program, smooth out some of the mechanics, which is often something you do almost immediately, and take a guy, in Festa's case, but this is a similar trajectory for a lot of guys now, that throws 89 to 91 in college and was pretty good in college, but wasn't great in college. And I remember as soon as they drafted Festa, they had him throwing 93. And then I saw him a couple years ago in spring training, he was throwing 94, 95, and I'm like, oh man. And now, if people watched him yesterday, he's averaging 95 and a half.
Right.
He's topping out at 97, 98. Yeah. He can hit 99 and right at borderline of 100 occasionally if he's really feeling loose one day. And still has two very good secondary pitches, including a slider that has the potential to be a true swing and miss weapon. And we saw a lot of changeups to lefties. That has the potential to be a pretty good pitch too.
I'd heard about the fastball because you always, hear about the fastball. That's just, I think, something people like to talk about. Did he throw it even a third of the time yesterday?
And actually, Pete Mackey, the pitching coach, before the game, I don't know who asked because I wasn't on the road trip, but I saw some quote where somebody was like, "Give us a little scouting report on him. Like, what does he throw?" And Pete Mackey said, "I would expect." 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
Oh, really? Okay.
Fastball,
interesting.
slider,
That's about what I was seeing.
Not to get into the whole Johan Duran argument, but statistically, his fastball is by far his worst pitch. Now you look at it and you go, it's 96. Yeah. Everything is kind of playing off the fastball, but that's why, like you said, you talk about him as a guy who has a chance to certainly be a playoff caliber starter, number 2 or number 3 starter, I would say. The question with him, we didn't really see this yesterday much. He walked, his control abandoned him briefly at times.
Right.
But the big question with him isn't so much from a stuff standpoint or bat missing standpoint, although as you said, he didn't miss many bats yesterday. But it's, can he consistently be in the strike zone? Right. Can he trust his
And you can see
raw
why,
stuff?
Given the fact how much movement both of the changeup and the slider seem to have.
Well, and my thing is, when you take these guys who have been throwing 89 to 91 in college for 3 years, and 6 months later they're throwing 94, it would sort of stand to reason that they might have a little bit of difficulty corralling that new higher octane raw stuff.
Yeah.
But that is really, if you ask around, and even now we'll just watch him for the next few starts, hopefully, the issue with him is not going to be missing bats, I think, long term. It wasn't the debut, but the velocity's there. You can look at the slider, it works. The changeup potentially is at least an average-ish pitch that he can throw against lefties. The issue is just him. You're going to see moments, certain innings, where he'll just walk like the first 2 guys for no reason. Right. And you're just like, he has the stuff to get out of those jams, but that's just, you can't be a true frontline starting pitcher doing that most of the time. And so that's the big question. But we've seen so much improvement from him at this point already that I wouldn't be surprised if he's able to kind of smooth that out. And if he is able to get, even if he just has sort of run-of-the-mill bad control, which right now it's a little worse than that, I would say. But if he can get to a point where he's walking, a half a guy per 9 innings more than the league average, 3.5 instead of 3 or something like that, he absolutely has the rest of his game capable of being a number 2 or a number 3 starter.
Yeah, he only walked one guy yesterday.
Yeah. He was in the zone. The weird thing, it was an uncharacteristic start from him because you look at his minor league numbers, it's massive strikeout rates.
Right, yeah,
13 strikeouts per 9 innings and big swing and miss rates on all 3 pitches.
Well, and also, while we're having this conversation, it's fun to watch a highly touted prospect pitch their first game.
Yeah.
It's also the first game out there. Like we talked a little bit of those on Patreon. I will just do a quick Patreon plug here. We talked a lot of Festa. Yeah, the first 2 days ago when we gathered, he was going to be coming up. We discussed the whole Paddack move, etc. We get to go into a lot more detail on a lot more stuff when we are doing
the second half
every
of the
other
season
day.
now.
Right? Yeah,
join it up.
Talking about individual games, etc. Like we like doing that stuff.
Patreon.com/Gleeman. Join.
Right,
but to your point,
not a lot of swing and miss stuff.
Yeah, you got I think 6 swings and misses, and I mean that's what. First time through the lineup looked good. Ton of just choppers to second base and first base.
Right, yeah.
Often on the changeup from lefties, which was interesting. And then second time through, actually, it kind of reminded me of Varland's relief appearance like a week and a half ago, where he was cruising, then he gave up like 800 singles in a row.
Right, that's right.
And
a lot of them were not really hard hit singles.
Same
These
as
were
Festa. I mean, I'm not going to say these were like lucky singles. They were, legitimate singles, but he wasn't giving up rockets.
Yeah, these are bloopers over the short stuff.
This is what happens when you don't miss bats, which is why we always focus on strikeouts for starting pitchers and pitchers in general. And to me, the fact that first of all, he got through 5, although if they didn't have the big lead, he wasn't going to come back out for the 5th. He might not have finished the 4th.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
If it had been
if it was a close game, probably not. Yeah.
I looked this up. That's the most runs ever allowed by a Twins pitcher in a winning debut.
Okay,
5.
all right, yeah.
Because most of the time, you either get blown up and you lose, or if it's a close game, you're not allowed to stay in and give up 5 runs.
Well, we'll get to see him. His next start will be here at home. That'll be fun.
Yeah, first game of the homestand, right?
First Tuesday? Or second game of the homestand. Yeah.
But what we saw the second time through was he just couldn't finish at bats, and they were putting the ball in play, and some of them were liners, and they just singled them to death.
Right.
That's not great to see because now he's facing major league hitters, and it's like, well, until proven otherwise, you need to be able to finish those at bats.
Right.
And maybe this is the case. Maybe he can do that against AAA guys, and he can't do it against major league guys. But that doesn't usually happen. That's not usually the case. Now, maybe that would be the case if a guy had amazing minor league numbers, and you watch him, and he's throwing 90. Right. They've called guys up like that in the past, the previous regime, especially where it's like, this guy was amazing in the minors, but now you see him in the majors, and you go, yeah, he just was kind of slicing up double and AAA hitters with mediocre raw stuff, but great control and command. It's not going to necessarily play. Well, the stuff is there for Festa. So I don't really have any long-term concerns about him missing bats.
No, I don't
that
either.
Potentially could be the biggest strength of his entire game. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that he still had a pretty decent debut without missing bats and the damage that did come against him the second time through the lineup was purely guys just putting the ball in play.
A lot of opposite field stuff. Yeah.
So I actually think that was decent. But again, the run support masks what was otherwise not a great overall start. But again, that's why I like the idea of giving him a little bit more runway here. A little bit, because as you said, I mean, you could think back to Twins debuts in the past. Jose Barrios had a horrible debut. Trevor May, I will always remember, couldn't make it out of the first inning. Yeah. I mean, pitching debuts. I mean, hitting debuts are the same, except
I feel like Joe Ryan's one was really similar in that he was like really good through the first part of the year. I want to take a look. Remember what Joe Ryan is.
I was there for it, I think, because he came back from the Olympics and it was in September of 2021. Anyway,
I'll take a look at that.
Hitters probably have these extreme debuts also because they're nervous and everything. Right. But a guy, batting 7th in the lineup, going 0 for 4 with 2 strikeouts, it's not noticeable. It's just like, oh, so-and-so didn't have a hit today. But a starting pitcher equivalent of that is very noticeable because it's basically the guy threw up on the mound, which we've also seen a couple of times. So, he cruised through the lineup the first time.
Yes.
It was just all ground balls and strikes.
All ground balls to first and second base, right? Yeah.
Great. So, encouraging, not dominant, not impressive, but an encouraging first start. I'm looking forward to seeing more of him. And I think, you look at the rotation now, you got 2 homegrown guys in the mold we just discussed, which was later round right-handed starting pitchers from mid-level colleges in Bailey Ober and David Festa
Right.
that they added significant velocity. I mean, David Festa is throwing legitimately 7 to 8 miles an hour harder than he did when they drafted him. And Bailey Ober's throwing 5 miles an hour harder than when they drafted him. Mm-hmm. Well, that's two homegrown guys that are pure developmental success stories, basically. They were late-round picks. They were never top prospects at the time. Then you got two guys in Joe Ryan and Simeon Woods Richardson who are not homegrown because they traded for them, but they were both traded for while they were in the minor leagues. Joe Ryan was at AAA. Joe Ryan was actually in the Olympics when they traded for him, but he was at AAA for the Rays, and Simeon Woods Richardson was an A-ball, high A. When they got him in the Barrios trade from Toronto.
Same trade deadline.
Yeah, you're right. That's pitcher development too. I know that people want homegrown, but trading for a guy at AAA and a guy at high A when they were 22 and 20.
Well, especially when you see, Joe Ryan adding 5 miles of
that's
velocity to
Joe Ryan just barely even resembles the guy from then. Yeah, he's added significant fastball velocity, but he's also gone from being a guy who threw 70% fastballs to now who's throwing fewer than half fastballs because his slider and his splitter and his sweeper, they've really turned him into a much better pitcher. And then we saw with Simeon Woods Richardson, his velocity...
He hit 5 miles per hour this year.
Right, because it had dipped. Anyway, those are four... They're not homegrown, but, this stupid phrase pitching pipeline has become such a point of emphasis and criticism often for this regime. But think of what you have now. You have Joe Ryan, Bailey Ober, Simeon Woods Richardson, and David Festa, all of whom are essentially pitching development stories. Sure. None of whom were top prospects at the point. I guess Simeon Woods Richardson was losing prospect status when they acquired him because he was the second guy in that deal. But he had been a top 100 prospect, but his stock had certainly dipped, and then it continued to dip for the next year or two, and then got back because they added velocity this year. And then you toss in Pablo Lopez, who I know is struggling, but that's another development in that last year. Right. He certainly looked better than he ever had with the Miami Marlins. So there's your 5 guys. Two of them are truly homegrown. Right. 4 of them are essentially homegrown in that they were in the minors when you got them. And all of them you can point to some aspect of their performance, most of the time with velocity, but in a couple cases with adding entirely new pitches of pitcher development. And I'm not saying this is going to be an amazing rotation. It hasn't been that good this year. But this was the plan, basically, to start churning out some of these guys.
Since we have last talked, which was like 2 weeks ago, last weekend we saw 2 of the better pitching performances that we're going to see, where they almost gave the bullpen a 3 days off between an off day, a 89 pitch performance by Ober, and then Pablo Lopez striking 14 people out on Sunday. That was an amazing weekend of pitching.
They have to put a good run together collectively.
Sure.
But you also, you still have Varlin, Zebby Matthews, I think a guy that, if not this year, we're certainly going to be talking about him by midseason next year. And they have some other guys, too, that I think are very intriguing. So there's some pitching. I know it's not as much or as quick as people want, but the pitching development is starting to churn out clearly talented guys and guys where you can look at it and go, man, this guy's just gotten better. Like his raw stuff has just gotten better. Now it's a matter of putting it together consistently, staying healthy, all that stuff. But that's been the Festa... I'm trying to make sure I think I had one other thing I wanted to say about Festa. I know we talked about Paddack much more on the Patreon.
Yes.
In terms of how do you evaluate, he threw like 70 innings or whatever. Right. How do you evaluate his first 70 innings?
Yeah, I'm still not necessarily worried about Paddack. I'm kind of interested to see what he bounces back from this little risk.
Yeah, I mean,
with.
The thing I said was like,
I mean, you mentioned the overall the rotation hasn't been good. I'm still not necessarily worried about the rotation. Like Ober hasn't been particularly good. Lopez hasn't been particularly. Right. I'm not that worried about those.
Yeah, I'm not either. But
yeah, maybe I should be. Right? I don't know.
But yeah, with Paddack, I mean, I talked on the Patreon about. We saw the same thing with Maeda last year. When guys are coming back from Tommy John, let alone now a second Tommy John in Paddack's case, but when guys are coming back from Tommy John, no matter how much extra time you give them, because Paddack got extra time, Maeda got a lot of extra time. Yeah. No matter how optimistic you may be, same thing, yeah. No matter how optimistic you may be, you're going to run into speed bumps or roadblocks that you're not anticipating. whether it's from a workload standpoint, whether it's a re-injury standpoint, whether it's just a fatigue standpoint. Because we saw the same thing with Maeda last year. He went through a really rough patch. They shut him down with, I forget if it was just like forearm soreness or something, and he missed, however many weeks, and he came back and he was great down the stretch. Right. Well, that's the hope with Paddack, obviously, is that Paddack showed signs. You can point to 3 or 4 different starts that he made out of the whatever 13 he made, I don't know, where you go, this guy was awesome. Right. Great one against Cleveland. He had a great one against the White Sox. He had a good one on the road against, I don't know, I'm trying to remember. But there are 3 or 4, maybe even 5 starts where you go, oh, this guy has playoff caliber stuff. Yes. This guy looks great. They let him go deeper in games than I certainly expected, given his situation. But then he would have starts where it's just like, what happened to his stuff? Like what he just, like he said, it felt like I was throwing a bowling ball up there. So the hope, I think, is you give him 3 weeks or a month or whatever it ends up being off. You plug him back into the rotation, however that happens, we'll see. Yeah. A lot can change between now and then. And you hope, like Maeda last year, he can put together a 10-start stretch where he's just a lot more consistently high-end. And if not, maybe you move him to the bullpen, maybe you shut him down again, maybe whatever it is. So, I don't know. I think it's a good opportunity to see Festa. And after we read this ad, I'm going to pitch a similar opportunity for a hitting prospect.
We've been talking about pitching prospects. I'm looking forward to the hitting prospect talk. But first, let's talk a little bit about Factor. I got to tell you, I'm really impressed with Factor. Their meals, which are not really frozen, they just come prepackaged meals that you just kind of heat up in the microwave, basically check off like every box. Like they are healthy, they are convenient, and they taste really good. The butter chicken is like one of the better meals, one of the better butter chickens, one of the better curry-based meals I've ever had.
It's always fresh, never frozen, dietitian approved, and then you can pick, if you're doing low calorie or protein plus, or if you have specific dietary needs, or you can just pick stuff that looks good because every week there's like 35 different meals and a bunch of add-ons that you can choose.
It takes like 2 minutes. I'd like just having a few available in the fridge. Chrissy and I like to cook. Most of the times we cook, we also like to go out to eat. But I like having a couple of these around, just like we're both exhausted. We've had a rough day. Let's just throw these in there, and you're still going to get some really good food.
And here, if you go to Factor, F-A-C-T-O-R, factormeals.com/Gleeman50, the number 50, and use the code Gleeman50. The reason it's Gleeman50 is you get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month. So that's the code Gleeman50 at factormeals.com/Gleeman50. You get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. Go to factormeals.com/Gleeman50 and use the code Gleeman50.
Factormeals.com. Right.
Okay, so
/Gleeman.
Everything I said about Festa, you could probably say that and now more about Brooks Lee. Right. Who is absolutely on fire at AAA since being activated after missing 2 months, 2+ months, since the middle of spring training, basically, with a herniated disc in his lower back. He went on a brief rehab assignment where he hit like 350 in the low minors. I don't know how many weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, they activated him at AAA, put him right back into the lineup. He's in another homer yesterday. Had not another homer. He had 3 hits yesterday.
Okay.
Homer the day before. He's now hitting 360 with an 1100-something OPS in like 20 games at AAA. Right. Including, the biggest thing that when I talked to him in spring training, wanted to work on is he's a switch hitter, but he had always been much better from the left side.
Right.
And even if you watched like clips of him last year from the right side, it was much less smooth, much more of like a herky-jerky, more upright stance. And his goal was, I'm so smooth, everybody loves my swing from the left side. It's a contact, line drive swing. Right. You watch him and it's like, oh yeah, this is a coach's kid. Then you watch them from the right side and it's like, this seems really kind of mechanical, like robotic almost. His thing was like, I just want to make him the same now.
Right.
And now he's crushing left-handed pitching from the right side. Yeah. He's got, 4 homers or something from the right side.
Yep.
That's important just in general because if you're a switch hitter, you want to be good from both sides of the plate. But it's particularly important right now as we talk about how can he get into the Twins' plans, let's say even in the second half, because the most obvious roster spot would be Kyle Farmer's roster spot.
Yeah.
And what is Kyle Farmer?
Boy, did Farmer look lost yesterday.
Yeah, although
he nailed that one into deep center then on the last one. I was like, oh, I hope this is a sign of things to come.
I was watching with Becky. I don't know. All of a sudden, Becky's very into watching. I don't know why. I think the Wolves playoff run got her into sports, and then we started watching Lynx, which she likes. Sure. And now she's like, let's watch the Twins. And I'm like, really?
Okay, great.
I'm like, I don't even really want to watch them. But she was like, yeah, he looks rough. And then I was telling her about him, and she saw the numbers. He was hitting 180 or whatever. And then she was watching. He hits the ball to dead center.
Right.
Looks like a skip up against the wall double.
Made a nice play.
And she's like, that seems not fair. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. They shouldn't be allowed.
You're right, yeah.
You should get like a power pack if you're hitting below 200 where you can add an extra 3 feet onto a fly ball.
Are those walls further back?
Arizona's super deep center field, and then it also has the big high wall where balls will skip off there. Wow. So a lot of center fielders play it almost like the baggy at the dome because they're expecting it to bounce back. But yeah, it's hard to hit one out to center, which is why Buxton's was so impressive.
Right, yes, right.
Cleared it by 40 feet or whatever. Right. I mean, he just murdered that baseball. But my point is, what is the role that Farmer has done now for a year and a half for the most part? Yeah, he's a backup at a bunch of spots, but his majority of his action comes against left-handed pitchers. Mm-hmm. Well, 2 things about that. One, with Willie Castro playing second base, there's less obvious platoon need for a guy at second base when Julian was the second baseman. Right. You do see Farmer start at second base against lefties, and you see Castro go to left field, but they also could just use Martin
in left field and have Castro.
So it's a little bit superfluous. Like we talked about, they have more right-handed bats than they used to have. Yeah. The other thing is, as we also just talked about, they're kicking the shit.
Right.
Sorry. Kicking the S. I thought this was the Patreon. They're kicking the S out of left-handed pitchers. Last year at this time, Farmer was like batting 3rd or 4th against lefties a lot of time. And he was productive against lefties. He's been productive against lefties for his whole career. That's why he's in this role. Yes. But they're destroying left-handed pitchers, and he's at the point now where he's batting 8th or 9th against them. And so...
And part of that is just because everybody else was doing
correct,
so well.
And part of it is because he just hasn't been productive. Right. And so you add all that together, and it's like, well, Brooks Lee's a switch hitter who's been thriving of late after making some mechanical changes as a right-handed hitter. He certainly can play second base, and ultimately I think that's going to be his long-term home with the Twins.
Sure.
He has as much or more overall versatility defensively as Farmer. Like if Correa were to miss time, I would much rather start Brooks Lee as your everyday shortstop than Kyle Farmer or even Willie Castro. He can play third base, which he's been playing in the minors. And so I start to wonder, not now, but as you get to the trade deadline, because there is some incentive. You're basically 30 days now from the trade deadline, essentially. Right. There is some incentive to delay permanent moves to figure out, to wait like, let's say 3 to 4 more weeks so that you can know what's your health at the trade deadline.
Right. Yeah.
What holes do, if 2 infielders go down, you need to go get somebody.
Right.
If everyone's healthy, then you can say to yourself at that point, we don't need to address this at the trade deadline. We could just call up so-and-so. You want to, a lot can change in the month between now and the trade deadline.
Of course.
And so if you were to like ditch Kyle Farmer and call up Brooks Lee, I don't think that's making the Twins worse. But you might be in a position 4 weeks from now, if somebody's hurt or Brooks Lee struggles or whatever it is, where you go, we would like to have that
Farmer back.
Farmer.
Right.
Whereas if it's July 25th, you have a much better idea.
Honestly, I think if they were to try and call up Brooks Lee, I don't think Farmer would be the odd man out.
Well, it would have to be. Who else could it be?
It'd be Austin Martin.
Right, but Austin Martin has been great.
No, he's been fine.
But yeah, he hasn't been playing that much.
But they won't. They don't have to release Austin Martin. They can send him down and then store him in the minors in the same way they're storing Brooks Lee in the minors. Right. The spot where there's a spot available right now is left field.
Well, right. I mean, it would be Castro.
They are doing mixing and matching essentially in left field. Now, sometimes it's Castro moving from second base and they move stuff around, but basically they've got an opening on a corner outfield spot.
Because they sent down Kirilloff and they chose not to call Wallner.
That's right.
They instead called up Martin. So now you're using Martin and Margot in that spot. Yes. And they've been fine.
Yeah. The offense is clicking. Right.
But yeah, I mean, I guess my idea would be
good.
You put Lee at second base. Castro can just go to left field,
right?
He's phenomenal left field.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Is that if you want to say, listen, they're not going to call up Lee to be the bench guy that Farmer is, right? And I don't think that that's what you're proposing, right? No. What you're proposing is you call up Lee, he plays second every day,
correct?
And therefore, and Castro still has to play every day because Castro's been really, really good. But now he's your left fielder. So that's what you're doing is by calling up Lee, you're fixing the left field problem.
Here's, I guess,
or not problem.
The point I would make is you're right that then Farmer, Margot, Martin, only 2 of those guys are ever playing at the same time, and sometimes only 1 are playing at the same time.
That's right.
And there's some overlapping skill sets there.
Right.
One, Martin can play the infield. He can play second base. He can play third if you need him to. And because Willie Castro, he can also still be part of the infield mix at that point.
Yeah.
And so you're heavier in outfielders once Castro were to go back to the outfield than you are in infielders. But then the other argument I would make is, and again, I'm talking 3 or 4 weeks from now, not today necessarily.
Right, yes.
Although if Brooks Lee keeps hitting like this, it's going to, we talk about this all the time. Once you get to AAA, you can force the issue. Right. You can knock down the door instead of knock at the door. Right. I mean, if 3 weeks from now, if he's still hitting 350 with power, it's like, the show will sound a lot different. We'll be talking about it. But I guess with Farmer, they've stuck with him to this point, obviously. My thing would be, you want to start to see whether it's with Festa or some of these left-handed bats that we're going to be talking about, who are now in the minors are hurt, but I would include Lee in that group.
Right. I mean, by the way, any one of those guys could fill the left field spot too.
Right. I'm not so worried about just depth, floor,
Right.
I'm looking now for ceiling.
Right.
I'm looking now for how do we incorporate more left-handed thump into this right-handed lineup that's crushing lefties but okay against righties.
I'm with you.
Not for the second half, but also for the playoffs.
Right.
And to me, you're going to want, and I would argue need, 2 more left-handed bats in your lineup against right-handed pitchers for the playoffs. That can be Lee, it can be Julian, it can be Wallner, it can be Kirilloff, it can be someone you add, it can be, whatever. You need to figure out who those guys are.
Well, when the second one comes up, then Farmers might be in trouble. But he isn't going to be in trouble. He ain't going to be in trouble when the first one comes up.
But my other point is, what is Farmer doing in those roles? He's batting 8th and starting at second base against the left-handed pitcher. Well, you don't really even need that because Castro could be playing there.
Yeah.
And you have Margot and Martin who can play left field against lefties. So, I don't know. I just think his role has gotten so small.
No, it has. It has, absolutely.
And he's played better of late, but he's still not. I mean, he's hitting 180. We're halfway through the season.
We've watched this over and over. I'm not saying that necessarily is what they should do. What I'm saying is this is what they're going to do, right? We saw it with Gallo last year. You know when they finally gave up on – were ready to give up on Gallo? Mid-September.
Wow.
I mean,
it was late. It was August,
but they hang on to depth as much as they can, as long as they can. And if we think that things can change in a month because of injuries before the trade deadline, when the trade deadline comes, there's 2 months left, and they're still going to hang on to it because things could change. Because
I'm not saying they should do it today, and I'm not even saying they will do it. It's not so much a prediction. All I'm saying is, don't let the hoarding of depth, which is valuable. I'm not mocking them for that. It's coming very handy.
Right.
But you got to be realistic with what you're talking about here in terms of the underperforming player.
Sure.
And yes, Santana has bounced back and Margot has bounced back.
Both of them.
But here's the reality. Farmer has not bounced back.
He has not.
He's been slightly less bad.
And he's having trouble getting enough at-bats to ever bounce back at this point.
Right. The role has been diminished to the point that now I'm saying that roster spot doesn't just need to be that role. Right. That roster spot could be a switch-hitting starting second baseman who's batting second for you or batting 5th for you.
Yeah, I get it.
And my concern, I think the further you get, and this is just logic, I would think, the further you get into the season, the less important it is to stockpile depth.
Sure.
Because for one thing, you've played half the season now.
Right, that's right.
You've made it through half the season how you are. The other point, though, is part of the reason you stockpile veteran depth early is to have it in case of emergency. But the other part of it is
to allow those guys to develop in AAA.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Well, now you have Brooks Lee, and he's thriving at AAA.
Right, yeah.
And he's clearly, major league ready. I'm not saying he's 100% going to come up and hit 350, but he's ready to go. And I don't want them to be in the position, and I think they're willing to do this. I mean, I think this plays into the Festa decision a little bit, as opposed to like calling up Bosley or something. I want to find out who can be in the trenches with you in September and October. And I don't mean like from a mentality standpoint. I just mean you got to win games to get there.
Right.
But I don't think Brooks Lee is going to help you win games any less than, Kyle Farmer. And I think probably he'll lift you more than Kyle Farmer. But even more than that, even if it's just a neutral thing between the two of them for some reason, I'm just thinking you face Seattle in the playoffs. Right. Kyle Farmer is going to have no role. Brooks Lee might be your leadoff man.
Well,
might be your number 2 hitter. Might be
point.
one of your best hitters. David Festa, same thing. Could make an impact. Matt Wallner could make an impact. So it's not even the All-Star break. So, put some of this stuff on hold. But I really would be focused on trying to determine how we can use these finite number of roster spots, not only to get to the playoffs, but to position ourselves kind of like they did last year, where you're ascending, not just as a whole, but you have 2 or 3 guys you can point to who last year it was Julian, Lewis, and Wallner.
Right.
Now maybe it's Brooks Lee, maybe Wallner again, maybe Julian again, or Festa in the rotation. I want like the 2 or 3 guys as sort of a injection, a little more oomph for this thing.
I get it.
And I think as you get further into the season, the calculus changes between what is Farmer providing or what is even Margot providing. Sure, and Margot's done a good job over the last month. But if it's a matter of Margot having an extra good 4th outfielder that Martin could probably fill that role, this is the time of year where I would want to be leaning into youth and upside, because I think a lot of these guys over the last few months have proven that Martin has, I'm not saying he's been lighting the world on fire, but he's at least proven he's a major league player.
Yeah, right. I agree.
I think Brooks Lee hasn't proven anything in the majors, but I think Brooks Lee is at least proving he's healthy right now, and he's living up to a lot of the hype as a prospect. Wallner's been crushing at AAA, all this stuff. So I would want to be at least opening your hearts and minds to the idea of kind of transitioning here from placeholder low ceiling, high floor depth to how do we just put the best 26 on the field in September and October? And I think it's hard not to start to think about what Brooks Lee and David Festa and Matt Wallner and Julian, if he gets this thing back together, at AAA couldn't provide for this already good lineup versus some of the guys who are kind of holding those spots now.
I think the way the Twins view it and versus you, I think the Twins view it in a similar way, but I think their timeline is going to be different than your timeline. I think it's going to be they run about 6 weeks behind the Aaron Gleeman plan probably on this thing, right? Like if you would make the move by the end of July, they're going to make that move in mid-September. Maybe they
didn't do that. You can point to Gallo, but Julian, Wallner, Lewis, those guys were all.
Well, but those guys were also. There were opportunities for those guys. They weren't.
Yeah, they had to make opportunity for Wallner though. At some point, they made it with Gallo eventually, or with Larnach.
I will say this: Wallner. I'll just give one more Patreon plug. We talked a lot about this when Kepler got hit on the arm or on the elbow back at the end of last homestand. We spent a lot of time on Friday saying, okay, if Kepler's out, because there's a decent chance he was out, it was his neck that was the problem.
Yeah.
His neck.
What you said was true. He did get hit
that's right.
during the homestand.
That's true.
Missed a couple games, then came back and hurt the neck.
Right. Anyway, I think it'll be I think right now, if the Twins wanted to make room for Lee, they could make room for Lee, and the whole left field thing is an opportunity. Like it's not a glaring opportunity because they keep moving all these different pieces in and out of it, including Castro. Which makes if Castro was just your everyday second baseman, we'd be paying a lot more attention to the production we're not getting out of left field right now. But instead, that production tends to move between there and second base, which is where Kyle Farmer
really,
is.
the production's been fine. I'm not even worried about the next month.
Right.
Like their lineup is capable of scoring runs regardless of who's playing left field. What I'm more interested in is what do we do between now and September 15th so that this can be clicking on all cylinders. It can be the scariest possible lineup for an opponent to face. And like I said, I just think Brooks Lee or Matt Wallner or Julian, if he's
fair point.
How do we get to that sort of? How do we get from now where they're producing? The production in the moment is not the problem.
Right.
Like Kyle Farmer is not holding them back from scoring a bunch of runs. Right. But how do we get from this version to a fully formed? This is the group that we want to make a playoff run with, and that I think between 2 months between. There's a month between the deadline. That's why I'm kind of focusing on it now, because I do think you want to have some sense of that plan, if not already calling up a couple of those guys by the trade deadline, because it would determine how you approach things. One, you might try to deal one or two of these veteran guys who are kind of falling out of your plans. Two, if you know you're going to call up Brooks Lee and Matt Wallner and maybe Kirilloff if he's healthy, or Julian or whoever it is at AAA, well, that would affect your priorities at the deadline.
Yes,
you might just say,
you're right.
We don't need to pursue a hitter at all.
Yeah, right.
Or you might
That's a fair
say,
point.
if I'm going to leave all those guys at AAA, maybe we need a big bat. Maybe we need a whatever. So, and Festa, same thing. I mean, if Festa looks great here for 4 or 5 starts before the deadline, it would certainly, I wouldn't say it should keep them from pursuing a frontline starter by any means, but it might change the equation a little bit, because they're like, okay, Festa looks pretty good. Simeon Woods-Richardson looks pretty good, on and on. So youth has done pretty well for them. Now, there's been some flops, obviously.
Sure.
But if you start to look at who's performing really well here for this team, a lot of it is still young guys. And we saw it last year, too. And I'm not afraid of that. Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is I want them to start to lean into that.
Yeah, I would absolutely sign up right now with call up Brooks Lee, see what you've got, in part because you want to see what you've got before the trade deadline, see how he adjusts to stuff, and start him at second base and move Willie Castro to left field and make room, probably not by losing a veteran, but by probably demoting Austin Martin, who doesn't deserve it, but that's the way it is. Like you said, if you're forcing the issue at AAA, somebody up here is probably going to be screwed, and in his case, he's going to be the one who's going to be screwed. But which is fine. But my point is that does allow you to see. I would like to see Lee up here, see what he's got, have him produce from a month before the deadline, see if we need to consider getting a corner outfield bat. Right.
So, and I think that, it's different to me if you're arguing like there's this, like Michael Hellman is a AAA player for them. Sure. He's a utility guy. Plays short, second, third, center, fast right-handed hitters, got some pop, kind of a quad A player. The Twins don't dislike him, but who's
having a really good year.
Yeah, he's having a solid year. He's been good in the upper minors. He was picked out of Texas A&M. But, his upside is being Kyle Farmer, basically. It's one thing, and he's like 26, 27. If I were sitting here going, they got to ditch Kyle Farmer and replace him with Michael Hellman so they can fill the exact same role and just be a slightly younger version of Kyle Farmer. Right. Now, if you're a Michael Hellman fan, that doesn't sound so bad. I'm not saying that's outlandish, but to me it's a complete...
Or if you need to save $6 million in payroll.
Could have done that in November.
Right, okay.
But to me it's much different when you say... I mean, Brooks Lee, theoretically, I'm not saying in his first 2 months in the majors, but in the next 2 years, he's probably going to be one of your best all-around players.
They've known since the moment they drafted him that he was going to be.
So it's not just a matter. I'm not so
potential star.
I'm not so concerned in the short term about what's their OPS from second base going to be like over the next 6 weeks, or will they win one fewer game, or will he go through some growing pains? I mean, the truth is Kyle Farmer's been really bad this year. Right. He's been certainly less bad of late, and he has a track record that they've stuck with to try to get back to, and he's a valued clubhouse guy, and he's a solid defender and all that. But, he's played 60 games, and they're at the halfway point of the season, and he's hitting 185 without much power. And the secondary, the metrics aren't a whole lot rosier in that regard. And his role has been diminished so much because some of these other guys have stepped forward and because he's played poorly that he's really just like bottom of the lineup left-handed platoon guy against left-handed starters. I mean, I think you could shoot higher for that roster spot is what I'm talking about. I'm not saying it needs to be today.
I get it.
But in my mind, Brooks Lee's going to be up here at some point in the second half, barring an injury, obviously.
Right. Yes.
And how do we make that happen in a way that is the best for Brooks Lee, but also gives Brooks Lee like a real opportunity, maybe even more so than we were talking about with Festa? Because I would love to call up Brooks Lee and never send him down.
I'm with you 100%.
And that ultimately that's up to Brooks Lee, obviously. He needs to perform. But I don't want it to be, well, hey, Brooks Lee's hitting 350. He's played 50 games at AAA. He's going to get a shot here, but somebody has to get hurt. I think they're in a position. Sometimes that happens. That's what happened with Julian. That's what I mean. That happens all the time. It's not a bad way to begin a career, but at some point, if that doesn't happen, and I hope it doesn't happen, then you start to look around and you go,
We thought it happened yesterday, by the way.
well, right, this is what got a lot of people
45 minutes
thinking about this, admittedly. And then Brooksley had 3 hits 2 hours later and all this stuff. So, that's the Brooksley situation. It's a nice problem to have. I also just, I want to see good prospects.
I hear you.
I want to see the next big thing.
I do too. I would have no problem with them calling him up for a 1 month trial here, and I wouldn't be totally shocked if they're thinking, coming out of the All-Star break, we're going to do that.
Right.
Something like that.
I don't disagree with you when you say they're would be more likely to do that and send down Martin than Farmer. All I'm saying is, what does Farmer provide that Martin does not provide? Some ability to play shortstop and third base, which Martin is just a second baseman in terms of infield capabilities. Yeah. But they're both right-handed hitters. Martin can certainly platoon with somebody at second base or left field, and Farmer's ability to play shortstop, we saw how little value they placed on that earlier in the season because they played Castro. And here's the real truth. If Brooks Lee's the guy to replace him, Brooks Lee's a shortstop. So then Farmer's ability to play shortstop or third base has no real.
I think come September when they're not so worried about depth or something like that, I think I would be shocked if that's their thought process going into the playoffs. Like Martin provides you some legs off the bench.
But you're not going to wait till
September
sort of and then release a 34-year-old veteran in September.
You might put him on the IL for something like they did with Gallo.
Gallo chose not to be released, basically. Right. Or Scott Boras chose not to be released. Okay. It was more of I would say, a face-saving thing with him, where they basically said, you're not going to play for us again. I don't think it was this explicit, unless 5 guys get hurt, in which case, you're our first baseman or something. But I think his stock had dropped so much over the last previous 2 years that I think Boras felt like, and it was after the trade deadline, so he couldn't really latch on necessarily. But we see this year he was terrible for the Nationals. Yeah, now he's hurt. Whereas I think with Farmer, I would presume if you cut Farmer before the trade deadline or even before playoff eligibility, he'd probably latch on somewhere as a utility guy. It's just that the Twins have enough infield talent, thanks to Willie Castro, thanks to Royce, Miranda, Brooks Lee, etc. That they just that they just don't need that anymore. But let's see, finish up with a couple notes. I don't know. Royce Lewis's first slump ever.
Yeah.
I knew as soon as he said that. I don't do slumps. Okay, buddy. 0 for 16, whatever it was. And it ended on a ball that Gurriel probably should have caught, but he'll take it. We've only seen Duran pitch once.
Yeah, and apparently he begged into the game.
He begged into the game, and he threw no fastballs. So velocity-wise, I don't know. He only faced 2 batters. He got 2 outs, but so that's still.
He could use the break. I don't mind him getting a little rest.
He's thrown 10 pitches in a week, basically. Yeah, right, so. And then also on the bullpen front, we talked more about this on the Patreon side, but Brock Stewart threw another bullpen session. Sounds like the plan would be to have him throw one more once they come home. Then he maybe goes to a simulated game at Target Field against some hitters, and then hopefully go out on a rehab assignment.
Well, he'd be a nice addition.
Justin Topa is still aiming to come back after the All-Star break, but he's yet to throw a pitch this year, so we'll see. And then poor Matt Cantorino. Who's one of my favorite people that I've talked to, Twins-wise, over the years, was shut down again with more shoulder problems, went for an MRI. I'm guessing there's going to be some announcement on that at some point. I'd like for there not to be.
Consulted with, who was the doctor?
Kremchek, I think, who does a lot of surgeries. But it's just, it's remarkable how unlucky a guy can be. He was a second-round pick out of Rice. Now, I will say, I asked him about this, and he wasn't taking the bait. But Rice has a history over the last 20 years
of having shoulder problems,
of chewing up starting pitchers.
Right. That's right.
And I do remember when I was at Baseball Prospectus when they drafted Cantorino, and I remember we had a draft preview article about the best college starting pitchers a month before the draft. And there was a part about Cantorino, who I think was the conference pitcher of the year. He was one of the top 5 or 6 starting pitchers in college baseball that year. Right. And there was an article showing his pitch counts, and it was like a graph of here's the other top 10 starters, and then Cantorino is like on a completely different scale for them. They were letting him throw 125 pitches. Sure enough, correlation doesn't equal causation necessarily, but he's basically never been fully healthy as a pro. Right. In the brief windows when he has been fully healthy, he's been absolutely spectacular in the minors. Like, go look up his minor league numbers. It's like a 1-something ERA with 15 strikeouts per 9 innings. And then the really sad thing is he comes back from Tommy John. He misses a year and a half. He's healthy during spring training. He's in the big league clubhouse. He's throwing bullpen sessions. People are lining up on the side to watch his bullpens, and they're going, man, he's throwing 96 with a good breaking ball. The hope was we're going to send him to AAA. He's still going to work as a starter. He's going to throw 3 or 4 innings at a time and kind of build up from there. And then right at the end, gets shut back down again. Right. Yep. Then he tried to ramp up a month ago or something like that, gets shut back down again. Yep. It's really unfortunate. And, guys have come back from this much and still had solid careers, so the door is hardly closed on him. But he's like 26 years old at this point. This
was a high ceiling, similar to what we've been talking about.
When healthy, he has as high of upside, or he did prior to this last round of arm problems, as anybody in the system. The reason they kept wanting him to work as a starter despite all these injuries and durability questions is because he had like 4 above average pitches. Right. He wasn't just a fastball slider or a fastball changeup or whatever. And so, I don't know. I'd really like to see him get some window where he can just, whether it's a year or 2 at a time, to at least kind of get to the majors and show what he can still do. But I don't know. We'll see. All right. That's it. They play at Seattle now.
Yeah. And then a couple late night games.
That's right. Yeah. And then come home for a road trip.
Monday off, and then long home stand over 4th of July weekend.
That's right. We will be back Monday.
Yeah. Tuesday night game, Wednesday night game, Thursday day game because it's 4th of July.
Okay.
Probably Friday night game, Saturday night game.
I'll be there. You'll probably be at a few of those too.
I'll definitely be at the 4th of July day game for sure.
We'll be back Monday on the Patreon side. Patreon, patreon.com. We'll probably do Monday.
Talking about a Seattle series that, like you said, could be, in fact, a playoff preview. If the Twins end up in the, 4th or 5th spot, this could be where they end up
or
facing.
That's
right, the 6th spot. Yeah, that's right.
We'll if you don't want to wait another week for another episode, or longer than a week, potentially. We'll probably be doing one Monday morning and Wednesday morning as our usual Patreon schedule. Yeah. We'd love to have you join us. Sign up for the second half. It's $1 when we put out a new episode. Costs you, I don't know, $2 a week, $1.50 a week on average, something like that from now through the rest of the season. You'll if you've gotten this far in this episode, I would almost guarantee you will enjoy the Patreon episode.
I agree. Yes.
And if not, we still love you.
Yeah, we'll talk
to you next Friday.
Gleeman